saying he's committed to protecting children. The American Medical Association says gender-affirming care is medically necessary. For NPR News, I'm Shaylee Reger in Helena.
Public health restrictions that allow U.S. border authorities to bar migrants from the United States will expire tomorrow. U.S. officials are preparing for a large increase in migrants who seek to cross the southern U.S. border. President Biden spoke yesterday with Mexican President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador. They're discussing close coordination on border efforts. I'm Corva Coleman, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Walton Family Foundation, working to solve social and environmental problems to improve lives today and benefit future generations. More information at waltonfamilyfoundation.org.
On the next Fresh Air, as the CDC ends the COVID-19 public health emergency, psychologist James Jackson says millions of long COVID sufferers are experiencing impaired brain function and mental health issues, and they're getting too little attention from the medical establishment. He'll offer some practical advice. His new book is called Clearing the Fog. Join us.
Tonight at 7 on 90.1 KERA News. No matter where you are, it's Texas Standard Time on this Wednesday, May 10th, 2023. I'm David Brown. 19 days. Now, if you had a major deadline coming up, would you be feeling the pressure? Well, now hear this. Though it seems like only yesterday that we were telling you that Texas lawmakers were back in the capital city to begin their 88th biennial session, look at that calendar. We're now down to 19 days before the gavel is set to fall under the big dome, and a shout of sine die calls an end to the regular session, assuming, of course, that lawmakers can wrap up their work by then, and they don't have to go into overtime. But you know, here's the thing. When the heat is on, we know what happens, right? In trying to get a lot done in a short amount of time, well, details get overlooked. Some rather big items are swept under the carpet to be dealt with later. People at loggerheads tend to be more willing to give in a race to beat the clock. So, where do things stand at the State House, and where are we likely to be 2.5 weeks from now? To help answer some of those questions, we turn now to Kimmy Lynn King, a political science professor at the University of North Texas. Professor King, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Good to be back.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the bigger issues here. In the background of everything, there is the budget. Where do we stand with that?
So the budget, it seems, is going to be one of those things that they continue to push forward, because you do have the Senate, which is being more aggressive about the passing of its budget relief, while the House, as it usually does, tends to be more tempered and look through things. So given that property tax relief, concerns about the grid, especially this summer with new reports out that there will be a problem, and improvements to infrastructure have been at the top of the budget in terms of the direction that they are heading. And it is going to most likely be acrimonious, as it has been all session.
Yeah, getting closer and closer to the wire here. Let's talk about something else that we've been hearing a good bit about and reporting a good bit about here on the Standard: school vouchers, or something quite similar to them. What are you hearing on that front?
So it's pretty clear that the House is putting forward a more limited view on the school vouchers, wanting to give the greatest amount of relief to persons with educational disabilities or folks that are financially challenged, and being more generous to them than necessarily the private school vouchers, which seem to have had more traction in the Senate. What is going to be a battle, and what you'll want to watch for, especially in light of Representative Slayton's resignation and then expulsion from the House, is the extent to which they remove things about gender orientation and identity and gender in general that gets moved out of the Senate bill, which currently is what's been put before the House.
I suppose we should touch on something that was a priority for many Republicans, the property tax relief. Where do we stand with property tax relief? I know that the lieutenant governor, this is a big issue for him.
Yeah, and the question comes down to how you assess that property tax relief and whether or not you put caps on it or whether you provide relief in any given year back to individuals. One of the things you've seen since the House and Senate fight on this is the battle over what is the best way to bring that tax relief out. And if you look at like Tarrant County, for example, they have been very concerned because their property values have gone up and down, but the way we assess property values is at a given time in the year. And that can make a huge difference for those modest homeowners that are the ones really squeezed by this.
You know, something that was an issue, big issue in the last session, in fact, maybe the one before that, and is an issue once again in the 88th, voting rules around what a lot of Republicans are framing as election integrity. Where are we with that?
So we have any number of bills, and they too are going to be at the top of the list. And no matter what comes out this legislative session, you should be ready for lawsuits against the state of Texas on it. The biggest area has to do with Harris County, and in fact, there's some legislation currently pending that only targets Harris County because they have had issues. Trying to retain control at the state level, giving the Secretary of State greater authority for auditing, appointing conservators, raising penalties from a misdemeanor if you vote and were not supposed to have voted, from a misdemeanor to a second-degree felony. All of this around the issue regarding voter fraud or concerns that are claimed about that, despite the fact that there's been absolutely no evidence regarding voter fraud.
Border security is something that we're going to be talking a lot about, certainly later in our broadcast today and tomorrow, when there is set to be a major change at the federal level. What are you hearing on that front from the Texas legislature?
Well, it looks like in the House, the Democrats have stopped it short procedurally because last night at 10 o'clock, you really start to begin the final countdown for getting things on the House calendar by Thursday morning. And as a result, early morning hearings revived that legislation. And so while folks thought it had been stopped, it is continuing to move forward again, giving a new bureaucracy for the state, the ability to mobilize troops at the border, and to continue to spend monies the way we've been spending in Operation Lone Star. And so you're going to see increased consternation over that and how much it's going to cost.
Well, it seems like there's a whole lot still left to be done before we have Memorial Day and the end of this session. Any sense of whether or not the governor may have to call another special session this year?
I think that there is a great likelihood that you will see a special session. Remember the last time, because of our unique system in the biennium where you only meet for 140 days in the citizen legislature, it has become much more common, beginning with Governor Perry and continuing through with Governor Abbott, to call repeat sessions. And he's been extraordinarily successful in calling the special sessions. So as much as people think that it will be over at the end of May, it's never really over until it's over.
Kimmy Lynn King is a political science professor at the University of North Texas. Professor King, thanks so much for speaking with us on The Standard. We appreciate it.
Keep up the great work.
You know, while we are focused on the legislature, this time yesterday we were telling you about a Texas House panel passing a bill that would raise the minimum age to purchase a semi-automatic rifle in the state. It's the first time such a bill has moved beyond a committee, but you know, that may be as far as it goes. As of Wednesday morning, the bill is not on the House calendar and won't be forward until and unless it gets attached to another bill as an amendment. Well, the Texas Newsroom, Sergio Martinez Beltran digs into why, despite gun violence survivors pleading with lawmakers, this measure may be doomed.
The committee room was packed at capacity, with reporters lined in the back of the room and a mix of people wearing red shirts and t-shirts with the faces of their loved ones killed in mass shootings. It was an unexpected victory for gun control, but came after months of protests and advocacy.
It's about damn time.
Nikki Cross was there. Her 10-year-old son, Uzziah Garcia, was killed at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde nearly a year ago.
We're not going to go away. We're going to, fight this all the way to the Senate. So.
But a vote in the Texas Senate is a long way from here. It needs to clear some key hurdles, and in reality, it probably will not make it for a vote on the House floor. That's the truth. This is Texas. Here, you don't have to pass a background check to buy a gun. Here, it's legal to carry a concealed weapon without a permit, and there are no laws to prevent most people convicted of domestic abuse from possessing a firearm. That didn't stop Republican Representative Sam Harless from voting alongside Democrats. Harless hugged the parents of the Uvalde victims after the vote and cried with them.
It's very emotional, it's a lot of people.
Harless says he has 2 photos of 10-year-old Uzziah Garcia affixed to his computer that he looks at every day. One was a gift from Uzziah's parents.
It was the least we could do for the families. The shootings right now are just happening too often, so if this is something we can do to help stop it, then I'm all for it.
But just a couple of days later, reality has set in. The top Republican, Governor Greg Abbott, is still not talking about measures to restrict gun access. Not even after the shooting last weekend at an outlet mall in Allen, Texas that killed 8 people, including a 3-year-old boy. During a press conference at the Austin airport this week, Abbott said he's waiting to learn more details about that shooter.
I believe in the coming days, the public will be much better informed about why and how this happened, and that will inform us as Texas leaders about next steps to take to try to prevent crimes like this from taking place in the future.
Those next steps, however, are almost guaranteed to not include gun control measures. Since Abbott took office in 2015, there have been 11 mass shootings with at least 4 deaths in places like schools, churches, and shops. At some point in 2018, very briefly, Abbott considered so-called red flag laws, but years later, Abbott has shied away from them, in part because of the backlash from Republican leaders in Texas. And that's why it was surprising to see 2 Republican state representatives vote to advance the bill to raise the age to buy a semi-automatic rifle. I asked Representative Harless, one of the 2, whether his vote puts him in a weird position with his party.
I have never made a vote worried about getting reelected. I make a vote for what I think is best for my community and my constituents.
That vote of conscience could have political consequences. I'm Sergio Martinez Beltran in Austin.
All right, let's find out what Texans are talking about online. Our social media editor, Wells Dunbar, joins us. Hello again, Wells.
Hi, David. Well, some breaking news at airtime here. A sentence announced in the murder conviction of Daniel Perry in the killing of Garrett Foster during racial justice protests in Austin in 2020. Perry's case became a rallying point on the right, with many arguing Perry acted in self-defense as both armed forces veterans were carrying guns. Many on the right seemingly identifying with Perry's stance against the Black Lives Matter-inspired protests as well. Haya Panjwani from our home station KUT Austin is at the courthouse, and she tweets, Army Sergeant Daniel Perry has been sentenced to 25 years in prison for murdering Garrett Foster, an Air Force veteran, in the summer of 2020. The judge, Cliff Brown, says in his remarks that Perry was given a fair trial. And of course, some more context here. Governor Greg Abbott urged the state pardon and parole board to act so he could pardon Perry before the sentencing was even announced. A little bit more to get into on this story, so I'll be back with more on that and other stories later in the program.
Let us hear from you. Look for Texas Standard on your social media platform of choice. Wells Dunbar is our social media editor, and he'll be joining us once again in about 35 minutes with more of the Talk of Texas.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas CASA, where court-appointed volunteers speak up for a child's best interests during their time in foster care. More at becomeacasa.org.
Good morning, North Texas. I'm Bella Cyrus. You're listening to 90.1 KERA News. It's cloudy outside, but you know what? We're going to make it a great day, as Jamie Jackson would say. Thank you so much for tuning in. You know, if you missed the last Think podcast or episode of Think, we do have a podcast, and you can listen to Chris Boyd's conversations with the world's brightest minds by downloading the Think podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Steve Inskeep with the one key habit for successful people, or at least people who are successfully informed. Listen to Morning Edition from NPR News.
From 4 to 9 on 90.1 KERA News.
KERA News always brings you the context you need to understand the important stories recent events in our world.
NPR in North Texas, 90.1 KERA News.
And on the KERA mobile app.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. Hundreds of migrants have been lining up to get processed at a downtown El Paso Border Patrol facility. They're part of a surge related to Thursday's expiration of the pandemic-era Title 42, which, as we were saying earlier, made it easier for the U.S. to turn away migrants. Aaron Montez of KTEP reports plainclothes federal agents have been warning migrants they need to be processed or they'll face consequences.
The migrants had taken up refuge at Sacred Heart Church in downtown over the last 2 weeks. For Gustavo, who only wanted to be identified by his first name, being processed allowed him parole and to be able to travel within the United States. He thanked God that getting processed went well, and he said he was always fearful of being deported. For other migrants at the church, the ordeal did not go as pleasant as Gustavo's experience. Some encountered challenges because of previous attempts to enter the country from years before. Late Monday night, the Department of Homeland Security issued a press release announcing agents would enforce targeted enforcement operations in El Paso. Human rights advocates said they're watching closely how Border Patrol and other immigration agencies interact with asylum seekers at Sacred Heart Church and other shelters. Marisa Limon Garza, the executive director of Las Americas Immigrant Advocacy Center, said migrants who have a history of trying to cross the border may experience challenges adjusting their immigration status, but they're still able to make a claim of fear of being deported to Mexico or their home country.
And so it's very real that both can be coupled together, that someone can say, I would like to seek protection, but at the same time, when going through a process and if biometrics were taken and if data was found, then it's a different situation for that person.
Limon Garza said migrants can petition federal agents for asylum while on ports of entry, crossing the border, or anywhere on U.S. soil. I'm Aaron Montes in El Paso.
Support for Coverage of Business comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, a workers' comp provider dedicated to helping businesses work safer, stronger, better, providing driver safety videos and resources to help protect workers on the road. More at texasmutual.com/driver safety.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard. Well, the Federal Reserve recently put out a report analyzing some of the failures behind Silicon Valley Bank, the California-based financial institution that went from being the 16th largest bank in the nation to insolvent in just a matter of days back in March. In this report, the vice chair for supervision wrote, and I want to quote here, following Silicon Valley Bank's failure, we must strengthen the Federal Reserve's supervision and regulation. Well, not so fast, says Aaron Klein. He's a senior fellow in economic studies with the Brookings Institution. He argues the Federal Reserve should stick to things like setting interest rates and leave the world of bank regulation a bit to the side. Aaron, welcome to the Texas Standard.
お父さん、車磨いてるから終わったら、待ち合わせね。もうクラス入り方わかるでしょ。わかるよ。今日は男の年配の人だよ。背の大きい人でしょ。優しいよ。あの人が椅子やってくれるからいつも。オッケー。はい。気をつけて。はい。
Asleep at the switch. Is this something that Texans should be worried about when they consider?
No. Look, your first $250,000 in the bank is rock solid, insured by the government. That covers 98% of Americans. There are very few people that have more than $250,000 in the bank. So ordinary people shouldn't be concerned. Number two, it's being reported as a regional bank problem. Silicon Valley Bank wasn't a regional bank. A regional bank usually has about 1,000 branches.
Right.
Silicon Valley Bank had 4.
Right. We're really talking about the ripple effects across the banking infrastructure, I suppose you could say.
Well, look, when people lose confidence, and part of the problem is the regulators are supposed to be there, being on top of these banks so some things don't happen, then there is a little bit of a confidence. You ask questions about a panic. A panic is when people start behaving irrationally because they've lost trust. And one of the problems the regulatory failures at SVB and undermine trust in the financial system.
Well, now let's talk about this regulatory failure. You say asleep at the switch. Why do you want the Fed to get out of the business of banking regulation? I mean, some would say, well, is it better to have no one at the switch than just to be asleep?
No, not at all. America has multiple bank regulators, the comptroller of the currency, the FDIC. There are multiple bank regulators in America. In fact, there are many institutions, and that's their primary mission, to regulate banks. The Fed's primary mission is monetary policy.
Right.
And David, any organization can only have one number one priority. If anybody tells you they have 5 number one priorities, then they have none.
Well, the Fed says that, right? I mean, the Fed says they have 5 priorities. They say monetary policy, stability of the financial system, soundness of individual financial institutions, right?
Yeah, bank regulation is their number 3 priority. They spell it out to the American public. It's listed 3rd. And organizations with their number 3 priority often have a difficulty achieving that because they're focused on their first 2 objectives. There's a deep irony here, David, that Silicon Valley Bank and several of the other banks that are failed because they didn't appreciate interest rate risk, the chance that interest rates would rise.
Mm-hmm.
You would think the Federal Reserve would have an idea where interest rates were headed more than anyone else.
Point taken. But what about other regulatory bodies and agencies? Why did no one step in? I mean,
Well, Silicon Valley Bank was regulated head to toe by the Fed. Some of these institutions have multiple regulators.
Right.
They're regulated head to toe by the Fed, Silicon Valley Bank. And they've had problems obvious for a long time. The Wall Street Journal ran a front page story in November that this entity was functionally insolvent. They'd taken away their interest rate hedges. They didn't have a chief risk officer. Meanwhile, the CEO of Silicon Valley Bank sat on the board of the San Francisco Fed, the agency that was supposed to supervise him. The Fed is the only regulator that has bankers sit on their regional boards. I don't think a CEO of a bank should sit on the board of the entity that supervises it.
Well, now, having said that, as you point out, not all banks are exclusively regulated by the Fed. We talking about a large number of banks that are?
About 1,000 are exclusively regulated by the Fed. They're called state member banks. But the core point of my argument is organizations have one priority, and the Fed's number 1 priority is monetary policy. And that's as it should be.
If not the Fed, then what? You create a new administrative
No, you don't create a new
supervisory
entity
structure?
at all. You don't create a new entity. The OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, or the FDIC both regulate banks. The idea here is not to create a new agency, it's to consolidate responsibility for regulation in an entity for whom regulation is their number 1 priority.
Well, for this to happen, if I'm not mistaken, the Fed gets its authority through statute. Congress would have to do something.
Correct.
And is there any appetite on Capitol Hill from what you can tell?
It seems unlikely. One thing I've noticed is Democrats and Republicans have continually doubled and tripled down on the Federal Reserve having more and more responsibility. President Trump during COVID directed hundreds of billions of dollars to the Federal Reserve to try and help Main Street businesses, an effort that largely failed. So I think politicians of both parties have largely been highly deferential to the Fed and sought to expand the Fed's role in the economy. And so I don't think there's much of an immediate hope on this, but I wanted to raise the point in a slightly different context, because I think folks need to realize that when you keep asking an agency, no matter how good it is at its primary objective, to do more and more different things are going to get lost.
Third, going momentarily.
God made his design for marriage absolutely clear. July 6th through the 8th at the Cadence Bank Arena and Conference Center in Tupelo, Mississippi, it's the Marriage Family Life Conference 2023. Strengthen your marriage and your family with Abraham Hamilton III, Dr. Kathy Cook, Miki Addison, and many more. The Youth Apologetics track is back as well. The Marriage Family Life Conference 2023 for His glory alone. Register today at marriagefamilylife.net.
We live in a day when America's families are under attack like never before. Buddy Smith, Senior Vice President of the American Family Association.
The war against biblical principles rages on numerous fronts. The internet, Hollywood, Washington, D.C., America's corporate boardrooms, and the list goes on. At American Family Association, we're committed to standing against the enemies of God, the enemies of your family. And we recognize it's an impossible task without God's favor and your partnership. Thank you for being faithful to pray for this ministry, to give financially, and to respond to our calls for activism. What you do on the home front is crucial to what we do on the battlefront. We praise God for your faithfulness, and may He give us many victories in the battles ahead as we work together to restore our nation's biblical foundations.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starnes with news and commentary next.
My goal as a teacher is to impart knowledge and then be able then for them to take it and turn it into wisdom. As we teach, I think, okay, 5 years down the road, how will the material that I am teaching them really affect their lives and their careers?
Hi, Todd Starnes here. Truett offers biblically centered degree programs. Check out truett.edu/Starnes. If you send your kid to public university, there's a good chance he's going to return home as a flag-burning communist. That's according to a new study from North Dakota State University. They asked liberal students and conservative students about their opinions on America. 73% of conservatives say they are proud to be an American, but liberals, well, not so much. 57% of the leftist children said they're ashamed of our nation, ashamed of the land of the free. The percentages shocked even the professors who conducted the study. Past surveys showed that most Americans were proud to be American, regardless of their political affiliation. North Dakota State also found liberal students believe there should be crackdowns on free speech, and only 9% favored capitalism, only 13% oppose socialism. So here's what's going on. Socialists are using our tax dollars to fundamentally transform our nation, from the home of the brave to the home of the woke. I'm Todd Starnes.
For He has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son He loves. Colossians 1:13.
American Family Radio. This is today's issues. Email your comments to comments@afr.net. Past broadcasts of today's issues are available for listening and viewing in the archive at afr.net. Now, back to more of today's issues.
Hey, welcome back, everybody, to today's issues on the American Family Radio Network. I'm Tim Wildman with Chris Woodward and Ray Pritchard, and we thank you for listening. Ed's gone, Fred's not here, so it's left to Chris and Ray to hope that
Codename Peachy Key.
Hope the best with Tim.
We do what we can.
I hope Tim doesn't say something that embarrasses us, because Ed's not here to look at me and go, don't say that. All right. Listen, joining us in studio is Abraham Hamilton III. Abe, good morning to you, brother.
Good morning.
Abe's the host of the Hamilton Corner each afternoon from 5 to 6 Central Time here on AFR. He's a constitutional attorney, and we're going to talk about the law right now for just a moment. You know, Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, had a case against him. Yesterday, a decision was released. It was a rape trial. Was it a trial?
It was a trial, and it was a civil case. So what people need to understand is that in a civil case, the only potential remedy is money. It's monetary.
Okay.
It's not a criminal. It was not a criminal case.
Then is it wrong to call it a rape trial? Is that wrong?
Is it
mischaracterization?
Well, yeah, slightly, because when people think rape trial, they automatically think criminal. You know?
Okay.
So it's a civil case surrounding
the accusation.
An accusation of rape.
And here's what I want to go through this completely, because this is a pretty big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the woman who says that President Trump, Donald Trump, the New York businessman, raped her.
That was her allegation.
Back in the 90s.
1996.
Is there not something called a statute of limitations?
Yes, which creates one of the most interesting wrinkles in this instance that is not being discussed. I haven't heard it discussed anywhere other than on my program last night. because the trial yesterday is one of 2 lawsuits filed against former President Donald Trump by E. Jean Carroll. The first of her 2 lawsuits was filed in 2019. 2019 was the year where she first went public with her allegation that she was raped by then sitting President Donald Trump back in the 90s. That suit was solely for defamation because when she made her allegations public, President Trump at the time said, "What are you talking about? That didn't happen." And so she alleged that former President Trump defamed her by saying that this didn't happen. All right? That lawsuit is still pending because there's a transcendent issue in that matter as to whether or not a sitting president has advantage of what's called executive immunity from lawsuits during his time in office. In addition to that, a second lawsuit was filed by E. Jean Carroll against former President Trump in 2022. The trial, the verdict for which was rendered yesterday, is from this 2022 lawsuit. Now, what's interesting about this, as you rightly pointed out, the criminal statute of limitations to prosecute an alleged rape in the state of New York has long expired. The civil statute would have also expired for bringing any civil claims related to that, except for the New York State Legislature just happened to pass a law that allowed an additional 1-year window to file a civil claim for an allegation surrounding rape. Isn't it interesting that the day that E. Jean Carroll filed this second lawsuit was the exact same day that this new New York statute went into effect in 2022?
Was this, though, in response to the Me Too movement?
That's what E. Jean Carroll said. It's up for the viewers and the listeners to determine whether or not they think this is more in line with an effort to try to get former President Trump, because I've never heard of a state creating a statute that allows a later statute of limitation only for a 1-year window to file a civil lawsuit concerning allegations.
I want to talk about what the jury decided, and then I want to talk about President Trump's deposition and what mistakes he likely made here. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's important to note that former President Trump did not testify in the trial. He did not put on any witnesses, didn't attend the court proceedings. Everything was based on the witnesses for E. Jean Carroll. But in this instance, first, the jury found that President Trump is not liable for rape, that he did not rape E. Jean Carroll. They then found, in a second count, that he was guilty of a battery. Not guilty, he was found liable for battery. The battery allegation, the jury awarded E. Jean Carroll $2 million in damages for the allegation itself and an additional $20,000 in punitive damages for the battery allegation. Then there's a fourth portion of the jury charge in this instance where they awarded E. Jean Carroll $4 million and some change for defamation, as well as an additional $280,000 in punitive damages, bringing the total damage award in the jury trial to $5 million in the case where former President Trump was held liable, which he had said that he's going to appeal that verdict.
Yeah. Ray?
So, a couple of questions. I heard some news reports yesterday saying that President Trump had been, quote, convicted. I heard that word, convicted of sexual battery, convicted of defamation. Is that the right term to use?
That is patently and technically false. Okay. Convicted is not terminology that could ever apply to a civil case. Mm-hmm. He was found liable is the technical terminology that should be employed. The verbiage concerning conviction would only apply in the criminal context.
Okay. All right, folks. What we're about to do now is dissect some of the mistakes for just a minute, because I think it's important and germane to this that I think former President Trump made in this case. Okay. Okay, let me just say this. An accusation from the 90s, who could ever prove or disprove that unless you had some kind of evidence that you've saved or somebody, or you know what I'm saying? So that just is crazy that you could. And how would President Trump or anybody ever prove you didn't do something if it's a he said, she said from 25, 30 years ago? Second thing is, or maybe it's the third, this wouldn't be the first time that a person has tried to shake down a rich person, with false accusations and they get a financial reward by either some kind of settlement, where the wealthy person says, this is not worth my time. Where do I write the check? I just want this to go away. That happens a lot in the real world. But so all that being said, here's where President Trump, here's where he goofed up, and big time, in my opinion. And Abe would like